This video is going to avoid spoilers because I want the conversation to be as inclusive and universal as possible. One Piece is critically regarded as one of the greatest stories ever told, and the commercial success has reflected that, making it the best-selling comic series to date. That's also why it has been able to keep running since the first issue, all the way back in July of 1997 before I was born, to today, 2.5 decades later, in 2022. And the story is still going. Fans of One Piece have been able to grow up with the series. It has inspired multiple stories that have come and gone, but all of this has placed a lot of potential viewers and readers in between a rock and a hard place. Because one doesn't simply jump into a story that has been unfolding for 25 years. It's a longer story than most of us have ever bothered to experience, and that is a daunting task. Even if you know that the journey on the other side could be more rewarding than anything you've ever experienced, that's a big commitment. A commitment that I decided to start back in April, and today I'm more than halfway through. So wait, why am I making a video now? If I'm not even done with the series, why don't I just wait until I'm done and then do a full review? Well, there are a few reasons. For one, I know most of you have not seen One Piece, and I don't want to make that a barrier to entry with this video. It's also ongoing, so even if I do catch up to go in depth and do a spoiler heavy review, it won't matter in like a year or two. So instead of this being a full-on super every episode reviewed, which is basic, it's been done, that's not really my gimmick, but it also only has value to those who know the series. I decided instead that it would be more productive to do a pitch as to what about One Piece makes it stand out and why you should give it a chance if you haven't already. Because I put it off myself for a long time, and now I realize what I was missing. And this even leads into my first point, and that's the fact that you don't need to get through all of One Piece to see the value. It's not something that you start now and you won't be able to feel any type of fulfillment from until you've completed all 1,000 episodes. The fact that it is ongoing means that nobody would feel any fulfillment for it, and it wouldn't be as popular if it wasn't able to consistently bring people along for a journey that they want to be on. Another reason why I'm doing this now instead of waiting until I'm done with the story is because now it's time, not later, that I'm going to drive from here, Michigan, to California, across the country, in a adventure very similar to One Piece, to find a treasure that may not even be there. Thousands of miles, my 15-year-old car, all while preaching the good word of this story about searching for that thing. And it is in the same spirit of adventure, of discovery. I'm going to see things that I've never seen before, because I'm going places I've never been before. I'm also doing something. There definitely haven't been any other YouTubers who've done like the same thing.
I'm gonna take an Uber from North Carolina all the way to California in one trip.
How are you still having a good time?
We're going to every rainforest cafe in the United States, Eddie. That's a joy.
I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to drive from Los Angeles to Boston.
I'm hoping that even though now I'm like incredibly anxious because like, oh my god, what are we doing? This is crazy. I'm hoping that once we actually get on the road and we start doing this, I'm gonna just enjoy the process, because like, what else are you gonna do? It's much like One Piece in the fact you've watched anime before, you know how it goes, you've watched things, it's easy. Then you have to times it by 1,000 and suddenly it's like, oh my god. Basically the same thing. I've been driving, I know how to drive. We're just doing it for about 3,000 miles. It's not a big deal. Both me and my cousin who's going with me, we know how to drive, it's not a big deal. We're just increasing the volume. It's just going to be a larger quantity. Whenever I say like, just watch this thing, it's not a big deal, people are always like, of course it's a big deal. Do you think I have time for that? Listen, if I can drive across the country, you can watch an anime. So since this is one of the more complicated videos I've made as far as format goes, let's just run down how this is gonna go. As I travel across the land, I'll share a few free values I have taken away from One Piece so far that have resonated with me and I think make my time spent worthwhile. Then we'll tie all the information together at the end. But also, for those of you who have read or watched One Piece, please keep in mind that my main objective is to pitch it to those who haven't. So when you notice I'm leaving out important details or telling half-truths that might frame something a bit differently than the text itself, that is being done intentionally to preserve the experience for those people. And as much as I'd love to boost my video in the algorithm with a bunch of well-actually comments, I do care about my credibility and would hate for someone to be like, wow, that arc sounds cool, I might finally check this out, then scroll down to see the arc explained with all the details I left out to avoid spoiling the experience, only for them to be spoiled regardless. So just keep that in mind. To start on our journey across the country, we went all the way to Illinois in the beautiful Midwest and immediately got stuck waiting for a train. And then we were off into the beautiful landscapes of the Midwest, which is mostly cornfields. It's mostly just a big cornfield. Look at all that corn out there. You can't even see it. Look at all that corn.
That's a fuck ton of corn. No more corn.
No more corn allowed. We're
crossing the Mississippi.
Wow, there's a ferry even.
And that was the last time we would see anything that wasn't a cornfield for quite a while. As it turns out, the Midwest is indeed just a giant cornfield with very few points of civilization in between, from Illinois to Iowa, all the way over to Nebraska, which what would be in Nebraska? Nebraska doesn't even sound like a real state.
I never really even thought about it, but like,
I'm still not convinced this wasn't a mirage. Let me tell you a very basic rundown of what One Piece is about.
Luffy, you just ate the gum-gum fruit, part of a group called the Devil Fruits.
By the way, when I say spoiler free, I mean I'm not going to touch on anything that happens in the plot. I will, however, talk about some of the world, run down characters, unless there's something about them and their relationship to other characters that is a spoiler. So you will have more information than if you were to go in blind, but my goal is to give you enough information to be compelled to watch and or read without giving enough information to water down your experience.
Eating any of them takes away your ability to swim, but the one you ate also turns your body to rubber.
Obviously, One Piece is about pirates. Pirates who are criminals. And it's kind of tricky to make the protagonists of your story belong to a group of people known to break the law. The obvious solution is to just say, no, these are good pirates. Which these Straw Hat pirates are good pirates. They have their own values and morals that lead them towards doing the right thing more often than not. Especially relative to other pirates in the world. These Straw Hats often leave the destinations they travel through better than they found them. But they are still pirates. They are still greedy, hedonistic, and are willing to engage in questionable tactics to fulfill their goals. And most importantly, their positive character traits do not outweigh their status as criminals. They are still enemies of the state, and that becomes more and more true the longer the story goes on. And this is objectively tracked by the bounties set on the heads of different characters. The higher the bounty, the higher the threat a pirate poses to the world government, so bounties become a power level type ranking system. And speaking of the world government, it is of course extremely corrupt. In One Piece, legality and affiliation doesn't really determine if a character is good or bad. In fact, you will see pretty quickly that there are positive relationships between members of the Straw Hats and members of the Marines and Navy. There are of course plenty of corrupt and sadistic members of the world government and its forces. There are also plenty of pirates who are like that as well. The point is, this is ultimately to kind of flip the status quo on its head, that criminals are always bad people and the people bringing them to justice are always good people. The text also freely acknowledges that authority ultimately exists in our current society to protect the ruling class, the nobles, the powerful, the royalty, the rich, and the affluent, while the poor and less fortunate end up in desperate positions that often lead them towards a life of crime. The brutal enforcement of the law, lack of forgiveness in the law, the many victims of the corrupt politics of the world, and the explorations into how people end up being pirates or even just being in the positions they're in, it all forces every character to have dimension and forces the viewer to examine them with more nuance than most other stories. To look at Luffy, for example, based on his background and his relationships, he really could have gone either way, into the forces of the world government or into a life of piracy. However, the experiences he had in his formative years, both in the people he was influenced by and the events that transpired, would lead him towards wanting to be a pirate. Then you have a character like Nami, who was forced into a life of crime entirely out of survival, and there are even members and allies of the world's government who are begrudgingly a part of that system. A lot of powerful members of smaller nations becoming warlords to protect their people, and it ultimately comes down to everyone's position in the world being a result of what they needed to do in their own personal circumstances to either survive, thrive, or just achieve their goals. And of course, not every person is led by noble motivations. Some people are completely corrupted and hateful. Some are just straight up sadistic. And the way that a lot of the privileged characters speak about those less privileged than them is oftentimes stomach turning, but it's even worse because it is kind of true to life.
You mean it's their fault for being born all poor and dumb?
People who are poor or people who turn to a life of crime aren't treated like real people. They are treated like trash. Their lives are not only disposable, but people are actively hoping to see them fall, even if they didn't do anything that's offensive to earn their reputation. Nico Robin's backstory got to me the most because she is introduced as almost like this legendary criminal who has had a bounty since she was a young child, but once you find out why she's had a bounty that long, it just makes you angry. Because she wasn't a prodigy or a mastermind, she was entirely a victim of her circumstances. And that's about as far as I can go without spoiling it. On day 2, we continued through Nebraska, and after one full day of driving, I was pretty confident in my prediction that this wouldn't be that hard. As tiring and mind-melting as it is to look out at the horizon, it was, as I said, just normal driving, but in a ridiculous quantity, which obviously I can do. Was I tired? Yes. Was the sight of farmland driving me insane? Of course, but I was motivated, and the fact I knew every mile and every hour behind the wheel was another step forward. Distance between A and B was shrinking. Little did I know, colorful Colorado would punish me for my hubris. Everything seemed fine at first. What you don't understand when you first cross over into the west side of the country is you're on an upward slope. So fuck it, I'm leaving that in. The elevation is going up. At first you don't realize, but then next thing you know, your car might start accelerating a little bit differently. Your ears start popping, and you don't see any visual evidence for how high you're actually getting. You just see a bunch of flatland for miles until you get closer to Denver, and then things seem a bit more habitable. And you can see the mountaintops not so far off in the distance, which is when you realize, oh wait, I am actually thousands of feet above sea level. And now, I can't speak for everyone, but at first it's cool when you look out the window and you see mountains, but it gets really old really quick, and it makes you feel kind of sick, literally sick. Guess who tried to work out and got altitude sickness?
Why does everyone on this ship call him Pops?
Because he calls us sons. None of us have any family left. Hell, the whole world hates us. I know it's just a word, but it still feels nice.
A massive pillar in One Piece is the interpersonal dynamics between characters. As a result of the state of the world, there are plenty of people who come from circumstances that were incredibly isolating. Usopp, for example, his father is a pirate and his mother passed away when he was very young, and that left him with a tremendous loss to deal with all by himself when he was just a child. And in the village he came from, he was a nuisance, acting out and telling lies for attention, but most people didn't hold it against him because they understood his situation, even if he was getting on their nerves. And one of the only people who fully accepted him was Kaya, a rich heiress who had been bedridden in her mansion ever since her own parents died, and Usopp would sit outside her window telling her stories about his made-up adventures as a pirate, and this gave Kaya company, but would also motivate Usopp to want to become the person he was pretending to be, a opportunity that wouldn't come along until Luffy and his crew came to his island and gave him that opportunity. And Chopper had a similar story where he ate a devil fruit that transformed him into a humanoid talking reindeer, and that made him unwelcome among his pack of reindeer, and also made him a monster in the eyes of humans. And a few doctors were willing to take him in as an apprentice, but those relationships had their own fair share of ups and downs. So for both Usopp and Chopper, these Straw Hats gave them an opportunity to not only put their skills that they spent years developing to use while pursuing their dreams, but also provide a sense of community and family that they were in desperate need of. And I think every member of the Straw Hats has dealt with some sort of deep personal loss, alienation, or just isolation from society. There are a lot of characters in the story in general who are outcasts in some shape or form. You'll see in many of the destinations the story will go, there are makeshift communities, found families, or people who are desperate to find that. In a way, the treasure of One Piece actually is the friends made along the way, because it's a recurring theme that characters would seem destined to live very sad, empty, and lonely lives until Luffy extended the opportunity to join the Straw Hats, and by extension, offer them an opportunity to finally live life to the fullest. Even for Nami or Sanji, who had people who loved and supported them before, those people pushed them to go with the Straw Hats because they saw what an opportunity it was for those characters to find happiness that their current life wasn't providing. It is the same reason why Luffy and his older brother were encouraged by the people who looked after them to go out to sea and become pirates. This is one of the main ways that One Piece manages to capture a very human element, and also what led me to choosing the topic of this video, because that's kind of how I felt with the people around me telling me to go out to LA, believing that will provide something I won't find at home. But the fact that we have all felt the type of connections, or lack thereof, that the characters in the story do, allows the story to hit you really hard because it taps into universal human emotions. Like, I can't remember the last time I've sobbed watching anything the way I did a few months ago watching One Piece, specifically because of how well they built up one of the most infamous moments in the series, one that was actually spoiled for me years before I started, and yet I still had tears running down my face watching the fallout just because of how real it felt when it impacted the characters and the world around them.
You guys take care. I hope we meet again sometime.
How come?
Get on already.
Huh? We're friends, right? So get on.
People can say whatever they want about me, but I've never done a single thing in my life that I regret.
I'll untie you, but only if you promise to join my crew.
You're what?
I run a pirate crew, and I'm looking for people to join up.
Your dream is foolish. Then again, so's mine.
Sanji, take care of yourself, okay?
I don't care that I'm weak. I'll protect them. I will protect everyone in the village if it kills me.
I'm perfectly fine. Come on, tell me who these guys are. I heard that you smiled with them. I haven't seen you smile in years.
I used to be the same way. You're not alone anymore, okay?
If you hurt a friend of mine, You'll pay for it.
I want to live! Take me with you! Take me away from here! Of course I will! Always be my friend!
Okay, so I was busy being the one driving through the mountains of Colorado, so there's no footage of that. All I'm gonna say is, if I never have to drive through Colorado again, it'll be too soon. But here's the mountains and deserts of Utah, and props to my cousin for driving the rest of this, because it was maybe only slightly easier than driving up and down Colorado. This was definitely the hardest and scariest day of the drive to get through for both of us, and I'm not gonna deny the landscape was amazing, very pretty to look at in hindsight, but driving 10 hours straight through what is mostly uninhabitable and difficult to traverse land, knowing that if for whatever reason the car overheated or broke down or we got a flat tire, it would be a very bad situation, especially since we were going down very steep inclines. Sometimes the side of the road was just the face of a cliff with no guardrail. It was over 100 degrees out for most of the drive, but thankfully none of that was an issue, so after a night in Utah and some powering through, we made it to sunny California. Then after a month in LA, my sister came out and we drove back to Michigan, a very brutal 3 days of 12-hour drives, driving a total about 70 hours over 4,500 miles through 14 states, and only getting one speeding ticket. And I am happy to never do all that again. Bro, I got like body dysmorphia. I've been cutting weight, and now like I can see my muscles, but I'm like, dude, I look so skinny, bro. Like, you can see my bicep, you can just see it, like you can see the muscle itself, you can see my tricep. I'm like, yo, I look tiny. So yeah, I'm not in California anymore. I know it, like, maybe I was giving off the impression that I was driving out there and moved there, and maybe I was giving off that impression because that was kind of the plan, and the plan changed. So the plan was, I had enough saved up. I don't make a ton of money, but I made enough, and I'm financially responsible enough to where I can easily pay for rent for a year. Looked at a bunch of places, contacted some places, was having trouble securing a place before I got there. I got an Airbnb for a month, and I was like, I'll be able to find a place. But as it turns out, income matters a lot when you try to rent in LA. Like, I would tell landlords, like, bro, I got X amount in the bank, I'll be fine. I can pay off the lease. I could pay it up front if I wanted to, though I wouldn't want to do that because, you know, you want to have some leverage over your landlord. But they're like, nah, you're poor. We don't want poor people in our apartments. You only make X amount a month. I'm not going to disclose that stuff because it's not confidential, but, you know, I'd rather not disclose how much I make. So that was becoming difficult, but also just, I got to LA, got to see my friends. I got to see Kevin, Shane, whole roundtable crew. Got to see plenty of people who I'm friends with. Didn't even get to see everyone I'm friends with, which I kind of feel bad about, but I went out there, had a decent time, but there were certain things about Los Angeles where I'm like, you know what, not really that big of a fan, especially since it's just so expensive. Like, there are so many things about Los Angeles where it's like, this would be an awesome place if I could just freely throw away money. If I could just throw money at every situation and not have to worry about it, this would be awesome, but I can't. It's also like the infrastructure, not a big fan of it. Not really a walkable city and barely a drivable city. Just little things about everyday quality of life, and overall, when I weighed out the benefits of coming back to Michigan versus moving out there, I was like, I think staying in Michigan is probably better for now. I could go on some deep personal thing that's probably most of you do not care about, but what it really comes down to is freedom. I mentioned earlier that Luffy, based on his upbringing, did not have to be a pirate. The options were there to do other things with his life. In fact, himself and those he came up with are some of the few characters in the story who ended up being where they are, more by choice than necessity. All of them had the option to fall in line and find themselves in a comfortable spot in the existing legal hierarchy of society. Luffy and his brother specifically did have a direct path towards the Navy or the Marines, and they still chose to become pirates. And the reason why they became pirates was ultimately for freedom. The freedom to maintain their identity, follow their heart, and not have their moral compass redirected by a flawed existing system. Which ultimately the reason why I followed the line of work I'm in is for very similar reasons. I had the opportunity to go follow a more traditional path and make a lot more money living a more normal life, but I wanted the freedom to live and express myself as honestly as possible. I don't know exactly why, but when I went out to LA, I feel like I became more extroverted than I tend to be here at home. Part of it was maybe just living on my own, maybe it was the weather, maybe just the vibes. Well, I think it was more than anything is I've lived in Metro Detroit my whole whole life. I have seen the life cycle of so many people that when I look at someone here, I can kind of guess and like come to some conclusion on like, what was your journey to get to this point? What caused you to be the person that you are in front of me? And when I got to LA, there were so many different people from so many different places, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't make those same assumptions, and that made me more curious. It gave me more questions I could ask people, and I ended up actually talking to some strangers, which was an enlightening experience. Also kind of taught me that, like, you know, maybe I don't know as much about people as I think I do. Maybe I should be a little bit more curious just in general. So that was a cool little life lesson. But what I realized really quickly, and this has stuck with me, is there are plenty of people who are like my friends, who are out there, who are like me, who are in LA because they have creative and artistic aspirations. They want to make things and they want to make a living making those things, but also have the reach of like a global scale, which is readily available in Los Angeles because of the massive industry around entertainment and art and all that stuff. But the thing is the reason why there is such an industry for that in LA is because there are plenty of people who are not like me, who are not like my friends, who are business minded, who have become professionals at taking what other people make and profiting off of it more than the people who actually produced those things will ever see, which that is already at odds with my values. And honestly, I feel like that's kind of happening on YouTube and Twitch and even like Audible and Fiverr now. So like really the platforms for creative people to monetize their work in an honest capacity, those avenues are kind of closing off. But that's a conversation for another day, especially because whenever I talk about this stuff, I feel like I'm saying the sky is falling. But the main appeal to moving to LA is to break into that structure, or at least make connections in that structure of like people who are not creative, people who do not know anything about making art or telling a story, anything like that, dictating over the people who can, and then taking the bulk of the profits from those people. And again, LA is extremely expensive. I would not be able to stay there long term, and maybe I would be able to swing it with what I'm making right now, although I would probably end up making more just based on the growth over the next year. I would probably be living in a way that would make me, one, probably need to get an industry job, which no hate to anyone who has one. I have plenty of friends who work in the industry. And two, I didn't feel I would have the same freedom to create my own thing, either through time, through money, through my mental health. And of course, there's like this whole narrative that you go to LA and then you struggle for money, and that motivates you, that drives you to make the best thing that you've ever made. You rise from the ashes and then you become this superstar, and everyone knows your name because you did so much to overcome your circumstances. But like, that's because we only hear the stories of the people who do that, and we like to pretend like LA doesn't have a growing homeless population, specifically because of how unforgiving it is towards those who fail to make ends meet. Of course, we all want to be like, well, that wouldn't be me, but I'm empathetic and try to be realistic. I'm fully capable of ending up homeless. That's not an unrealistic thing. And I also know myself and know that if I'm put in that situation, I'm probably not going to rise above and grind to survive. I'm probably going to shut down because I have a job where I need to be creative. And being creative when you are in survival mode is very difficult. And I'm more likely to be motivated with the chip on my shoulder that people think that I could never be a widely successful entertainer or artist while living in Detroit the way I would in California. As for what this has to do with One Piece, I just felt like it was a fitting parallel, that I was going on this long journey across the country where I was going to see a lot of different types of people and wealth inequality up close. And I ended up making a big life decision based on my desire for freedom, similar to the characters in One Piece. In conclusion, my name is Tom, and One Piece is pretty cool. And I sure would love to talk more about anime in the future, possibly on the roundtable. Who knows if that'll ever happen.